The ghost woman has undergone a host of aesthetic and behavioral changes throughout Chinese history. More recently, in Chinese language horror cinema, she is represented in a way that depicts her as the ultimate other, reinforcing a discursive formation that sustains a regime of truth in which women are antithetical to men. Through examination of her images in historical literary discourses, her disappearance during the Cultural Revolution, and her re-emergence in post-reform cinema, we can see how elements of her representation are formed with the intent to construct her as an extreme other. The classic Chinese ghost story is one of a fantasy of sex between a female ghost and a living man. The literary ghost tradition is, with few exceptions, singularly uninterested in horror or suspense. The woman who dies of desire only to be resurrected by a living man is a common scenario, as in the 16th century play The Peony Pavilion, and a number of stories throughout writer Pu Songling's Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio from the 17th century. On the other hand, male ghosts in literature are propelled by motives other than sexual desire. Meanwhile, medical writings of the 17th century contain reports of women having ghost lovers or husbands, as well as the reverse, despite the fact that in Chinese literary ghost stories, the revenant is virtually always female, the mortal lover virtually always male. This imbalance could be attributed to the fact that the literary tale was authored by men and represents male fantasies of woman as other. During the Mao era, all media was considered instruments of class struggle, meant to represent the people. Mao Zedong regarded television and film as a mouthpiece of the party and the government, and filmed operas like The White-Haired Girl from 1950 and The Red Detachment of Women from 1961 set the standard for depictions of heroes and villains. The anti-superstition campaign, which had been a part of Chinese culture since the late 1920s, gained new ferocity in 1966 when the campaign to destroy the four olds, including old customs, old culture, old habits, and old ideas, nearly dealt a fatal blow to ghost literature and to ghost operas. Meanwhile, Hong Kong's leading genres were comedies and action pictures, and their horror films followed classic formulas that featured beautiful female ghosts and their love object, the male scholar. As production values began to rise in the mid-1970s, genres like horror were upgraded by borrowing from Hollywood. In these horror films, while foreign audiences may recognize Western motifs, Chinese horror movies merely allude to Western horror movies. They offer the best example of Hong Kong cinema's pragmatic exploitation of Chinese literary tradition to produce popular works which find relevance to and affinity with its modern audiences. The economic and political reforms of the 1980s and 90s meant that formerly taboo topics like the occult, geomancy, and sex could once again be addressed in print. Writers on the mainland, as well as in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Malaysia, began to experiment with new forms of ghost stories, and the trope of the beautiful female ghost having erotic liaisons with living men began to wane. In film, it is much easier to exaggerate the feminine qualities of the ghostly woman. Film can also draw upon symbolic codes for Chinese ghosts, such as images of wind, fog, disheveled hair, moisture, and changes in lighting. Film can also draw upon horror elements like the primal scream, jump cuts, canted angles, and extreme close-ups, among others, to give audiences a sense of unease and cue their reactions and emotions. Both film and literature are involved in the symbolic production of difference and otherness, including the concept of binary oppositions, which is intimately involved in the production and reproduction of power relations, with one pole signifying the dominant one against which the other is defined. The phrase female ghost is even something of a tautology. To put it crudely, within the terms of yin-yang complementary opposites, a ghost is super yin, an intensification of the qualities or phases associated with yin as opposed to yang. Thus, a ghost occupies virtually all points along the symbolic axis of yin, associated with cold, dark, moisture, earth, lower, death, femininity, etc., as defined against the symbolic axis of yang, associated with warmth, light, dryness, heaven, upper, life, masculinity, etc. Though yin and yang are complementary and equally important, in a hierarchical culture and society, yang is consistently prized at the expense of yin. Ghosts are inferior to human beings in the natural and moral order of things, just as daughters are less valuable than sons. So why the change from erotic, sexualized ghost females to frightening female ghouls with malicious intent? It's possible that this is because, during the Mao era, there was a directed attempt to liberate women and bring them to equal footing with men. They could do the same work, be in the military, and foot binding was made illegal. An increasing feminine presence in society, coupled with the guilt of sex-selective abortion following the 1978 one-child policy, may have led a once wholly patriarchal society to view women with new fear and anxiety, not just as threats to cultural order as they leak from the confines of their houses into factories and battlefields, but as spectral representations of entire generations of murdered daughters. The function of the monstrous is to bring about an encounter between the symbolic order and that which threatens its stability. Stable cultures require things to stay in their appointed place. What unsettles culture is matter out of place, the breaking of our unwritten rules and codes. It is a sign of pollution, of symbolic boundaries being transgressed, of taboos broken. What is a ghost but matter out of place? Rather than remaining dead in the netherworld, a ghost has returned. The concept of a border is central to the construction of the monstrous in the horror film. That which crosses or threatens to cross the border is abject. The frightening female ghost is represented in two ways: as a ghoul whose perceived malevolence is neutralized through a politics of pity, or as a politics of pity case revealed to be a malevolent ghoul.
Politics of pity is a way in which the other might be imagined, in which others are cast as human beings and their suffering positions them as distant strangers in their bare humanity, demanding care, compassion, and pity. To arouse pity, suffering and wretched bodies must be conveyed in such a way as to affect the sensibility of those more fortunate. Distance plays an important role in the politics of pity, as there is a spectacle of suffering without any obligation to intervene. The spectator is instead made to feel luckier, more fortunate, powerful. Politics of pity is predicated on the spectacle of suffering, of morally arousing depictions of suffering, which positions the observer of suffering as a spectator in a radically different situation from that of the sufferers.
In The Eye, from 2002, the female ghost who haunts the main character turns out to be a young woman who committed suicide after she was ostracized for attempting to warn her village of an approaching catastrophe. The main character, a transplant recipient of the dead girl's corneas, must watch the girl reenact her suicide every night until she is able to learn her identity, fly to Thailand, and convince the dead girl's mother to intervene and put an end to the tortured ghost's loop. In The Forest of Death in 2007, a young woman is raped and murdered in a forest that is known for attracting people prone to suicide. When prosecutors attempt to get a confession from the suspected killer and rapist, who also reported finding the body, by bringing him to the scene and having him retell the circumstances in which he came across the girl's body, the ghost possesses the gathering crowd and shows them how she was strangled and raped by the man. She then strangles him as the crowd watches, nobody stepping in to intervene, while his lawyer announces that he no longer represents the man. These films focus on our obligation and responsibility to help them. It puts the abject woman back in her place. It will put a stop to the injured woman's nightmarish visions. It will win the case for the prosecutor, and we benefit. Once the story of the ghostly woman has been resolved, the boundaries have been cleared and symbolic order is restored, and the threat has been nullified. What was once frightening is now simply pitiable. On the other hand, films like The Classroom and Travel, both from 2011, reverse the politics of pity narrative, where a woman who seems beneath the film viewers and protagonists, appears in need, turns out to be a monstrous and malevolent ghoul. In The Classroom, a bullied schoolgirl tries to keep her teacher from falling into the hands of her vindictive, violent classmates. When the classmates appear to have trapped the teacher, threatening to kill her mother if she doesn't join them, the teacher stabs them all with an exorcist knife, given to her by her abusive ex-boyfriend, destroying their ghostly forms. In reality, the teacher has stabbed 14 innocent students and her ex-boyfriend. The bullied schoolgirl who had given her the advice was a ghost who had killed all of her classmates, teacher, principal, and herself 20 years prior, and had been manipulating the new, emotionally fragile teacher into doing the same. Similarly, in Travel, 4 women who go to the funeral of a friend they met while on vacation in Thailand begin to talk with the dead girl's boyfriend about her. Seemingly rather dumb, shallow, prone to laughing, and oblivious, the girls take the boyfriend back to their house for dinner to talk more about their dead friend, hoping, it seems, to woo him. It is revealed that the boyfriend himself killed his girlfriend and only agreed to have dinner with the 4 women because he believed they may know where his dead girlfriend hid the money she stole from him. He poisons the 4 women and leaves them for dead, but when he attempts to leave the apartment, one of the women stops him from the other side of the door. They were dead all along, killed in the same car as his dead girlfriend, and had only returned to play with him. Hearing that they would be returning to Earth, his girlfriend bid them to bring him down to her, which they do by ripping his soul out of his body and bringing him to the netherworld. The classroom and travel don't become frightening until it is revealed that these women who appeared beneath us, either because they were physically or intellectually weak, and because they were women, are dead and have crossed boundaries to wreak havoc on symbolic order. In these films, the male unconscious is unable to demystify her, is unable to punish or forgive her. In comparison with other genres, the horror genre does not attempt to soothe castration anxiety.
The ghost woman in contemporary Chinese horror films is represented in a way that depicts her as the ultimate other, reinforcing a discursive formation that sustains a regime of truth in which women are antithetical to men. By violating the boundaries set upon her, of death, of domesticity, of the ideal woman, she becomes a threat to cultural order and is seen as abject. Only through re-establishing boundaries can we relieve the anxiety she causes, but in contemporary horror films there is often no attempt to establish closure.